What is the most common misconception?
So I think I don't know that I know to call it a misconception, but I think the most common questions that I'm getting right now are why the solution that we're proposing is the right solution, and how have we vetted all other options? So the most frequent question I get includes, so have you considered insert option here, right? And sometimes it's renovating, sometimes it's South Street, sometimes it's the old Liberty Mutual site, and sometimes it's Center School. It's a variety of different options, which I understand. Not people weren't plugged in when we were going through all of these options, but we did thoroughly vet. I think the original number was 44 potential site slash construction options for the new school. So I think that's the one that is the most frequent out there. And then I think the other, I would say misconception, the price tag is obviously something that jumps off the page at you, because it is a very large school. We've seen a lot of inflation, especially in the construction industry over the last few years. And so that's really what drives the price. But what doesn't drive the price, and I think is getting out there, is any sort of luxury or unnecessary items for the educational model of the second, third, and fourth graders. Actually the designer on Friday, in a conversation I had with them, described it as a fairly Spartan design, because we are trying to really keep the focus on getting the most for our dollars. And we really haven't put in anything that isn't directly related to the education of those students.
From the enrollment numbers that we're at today and the projected enrollment over the next 10 years, this is a crass way to put it, but we basically have a gun to our head. And we don't have any other option.
I mean, I think it's basically true. This is what it costs to solve this problem. Are there different ways to solve the problem? Like, is renovating and expanding at the existing Elmwood school something we could do? It is. And I can go into detail. It's not significantly less expensive. Are some of these existing options like South Street or Liberty Mutual, they all sort of add up to the same amount of money, because fundamentally, everybody rightly so uses Marathon as the measuring stick. And, you just do the math. Marathon was built for just under 400 students at projection. It cost $41 million to build. I think we appropriated 45. It cost 41. This is being built for 1,195 students. So almost 3 times. So you can, even without inflation, you can just sort of multiply, and then you tack on a 30% inflation factor, which is actually a little bit lower than construction inflation has been. And you're right at the number we're talking about. When you say we have no choice, I would agree in that the only other choice is not to solve the problem. And not solving the problem means potentially more modular classrooms in Elmwood. I think what people don't realize is, even if we wanted to make a large addition, continue to add classrooms to Elmwood, classrooms aren't nearly the entire thing. The cafeteria at Elmwood is undersized for the building right now. You'd be running 5 lunches there just to get all the kids through. And that means you'd have kids eating lunch at 9:30 in the morning.
We're building it for 1,195 students. How many students would we see on day one opening, which would be in 2026, 2025?
2027. So right now on the schedule, it would have us opening essentially after the winter break in 2027. And so we would be at that time, the current projections have us, if I recall correctly, around 1,100 students for that time. But what I will tell you is, we're tracking right now as a district pretty significantly ahead of those projections. So right now, if you opened a second, third, and fourth grade school next year, based on our current numbers, we would already be at nearly 1,000 students.
Are you essentially saying it's going to be at capacity on almost at capacity on the day one?
So I don't think it will be at capacity on day one. And I know we ran into this with the Marathon School. I was involved in that project as well. The projections we had from the MSBA and our demographer at the time just didn't take into account what was happening in Hopkinton well enough. So I'm more confident that this one, we will not run into that problem.
How much impact will there be to the people that live on Hayden Row today?
I mean, first of all, I don't want to minimize it. Obviously, the people who live there during the actual construction project, that will be that will be of some significant impact. One of the things we did for the residents, for a couple of reasons related to Hayden Row, is there's a lot of land back there, and we chose to site this building very far back on the lot because we didn't want the building to somewhat be, first of all, imposing over Hayden Row and those sites. It's a big building. And so we wanted to tuck it back as far as we could. The other thing that gives us the ability to do is create longer driveways and therefore longer queues, so we can take more cars and buses off the road. Our hope is that actually not only are we going to not make traffic worse, but our hope is that it actually might make traffic along Hayden Row better, because we're also doing a connected driveway between Marathon and the new school. So we would like to get more traffic even than is coming off from Marathon now off of the road at those pickup and drop off times.
How much cost do you think it added to the budget of the school when the town meeting approved the net zero initiative last town meeting in May?
So I'll actually say none. The HVAC and mechanical systems is the biggest piece that is impacted by net zero. And we were certainly aware of the net zero initiative. It is a non-binding initiative, but the town passed it pretty overwhelmingly. And so we want to try to stay in line with it. We went with the most energy efficient option that was presented to us for HVAC and mechanical, which is a full geothermal system. But the reason we went with it actually wasn't as much driven by the net zero resolution as it was by the numbers. So the full geothermal system is, from a front end cost, more expensive. But when you factor in some of the rebates that we get from the Mass Save program, and then really most importantly, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last year will give us in the mid 7 figures of reimbursement for the full geothermal system that we're going to put in. As a result, the actual first cost of installation of that system is, when you factor in the rebates, is not significantly more than a somewhat of a high. Actually, it might be less than the hybrid system, and it's not as much more as you would think from a natural gas fired system.
The CFO, the former CFO of the town, created, with their, the way an accountant does, created just sort of the raw numbers. And the raw numbers, they're hard to swallow for a lot of people in this town.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get past this? What do we tell a senior who's on a fixed income? Their taxes are going to go up 40%.
First and foremost, I sort of start with the truth, which is that, yes, there is a significant tax increase and impact coming. But as we discussed earlier, in terms of our options at this point, in terms of solving this problem or not solving this problem, a lot of that tax impact is based on decisions that were made long ago in this town, and that unfortunately we're now having to find ways to pay for.
Like what, for example?
Well, I think a lot of, Legacy Farms is obviously a significant example. It's driven a lot of the population increase. I think some other zoning proposals that have gone in, some of the decisions that have been made around how we allow commercial into this town,
or don't
have caused, we've going from 15,000 people to 20,000 people requires a lot more infrastructure. And part of that infrastructure is we have had one of the top school districts in the state. And it's why a lot of us came to this town. And in order to maintain that for the increasing population, it requires a lot of more infrastructure. Now, getting back to what the CFO put out there, the numbers have changed actually pretty significantly in ways that I think are beneficial to the town. There was a number that was getting floated around that if all of the school projects go through, it was going to be something like $300+ million in additional borrowing. And while that was not inaccurate at the time, there have been some changes. One of them is that a big efficiency in this project is the decision the school committee made to put the fourth grade in as part of this project. So while it made this building more expensive, as you know, there's a project going on to expand Hopkins because Hopkins is not big enough to hold 2 grades at the size that we had. You move the fourth grade over to the Elmwood project, will allow the school to then make Hopkins, the expanded Hopkins, a 5th and 6th grade building. Moving the 6th grade out of the middle school opens up space. In that $300 million was an anticipated high school and middle school expansion. That will no longer be necessary. About 3 weeks ago, the school committee made a decision that they are looking at taking somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 million of projected capital off of their 5-year capital plan.
So when we looked at those projects, New Elmwood was 120 million because then there's another 40 coming from the MSBA.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Center school reuse was 20 million, which who knows where that's at because that's up in the air. Hopkins school addition, you're saying would still go forward at 33 million.
That still needs to go forward because that building, no matter which 2 grades you want to pick, is not big enough to hold 2 grades.
Preschool and central office was 21 million.
Gone.
And then middle school renovation, 80 million.
Yeah.
So that's gone. So, and then there were another 26 projects, 10 million combined, but that's all capital. That's not school necessarily. That's capital projects and stuff. So basically we're looking at 80 plus 21. So 101 plus another center school at 20. So 121 million that we think we don't need to do. Which would put the borrowing at the Hopkins school only and the Elmwood school, which would be 153 million, basically.
Roughly, yeah. Getting back to your original question about a message to seniors who are seeing their property taxes go up by so much is that we recognize it, and that the people in town, the volunteers, the staff, etc., are working as best they can to balance the increasing needs of the town's growing population with being as smart as we can to ensure that we keep that property tax increase as low as it possibly can be.
Do you worry about pricing people out of the town?
I very much do. And it's something that the committee talks about a fair amount. So there will be a special town meeting in the fall, either late October or early November, date still being determined, where it would need a 2/3 majority to pass in order to get the first approval. The second approval comes at the ballot a week or 2 later, where it would need to get a majority of the vote in order to get the second stage of approval. It will be the full value of the project that will be on the ballot.
So not just the 120, but it'd be the 160 is what it would be.
Yeah, it'd be the 160. So it doesn't include the MSBA reimbursement. It doesn't include the federal reimbursement money that we would get on the HVAC and mechanical system. So it's going to be a bigger number than will actually be paid for by the town. So what would happen is the project would cease to exist basically at that moment. The MSBA, the project relationship at that point with the MSBA would end. So
let's talk about 2032. Let's just say it, fails the first time, doesn't fail the second time. We're in 2023, so 9 years goes by. What is student life, teacher life at Elmwood like realistically in the 9 years?
So realistically, in the 9 years, we would have to do something space-wise for Elmwood. It will not hold the number of students that are going to be in the second and third grade within 5 or 6 years without just unreasonable class sizes from a physical space perspective. So we would probably be looking at adding significant modular classroom space. we don't have sufficient space right now for in the cafeteria or the gymnasium. So those students we'd be having 5 or 6 shifts of lunches or gym classes, et cetera. We would probably need additional staff because those class sizes would get larger. So you'd have to have additional paraprofessionals in the classroom. So there would be an operating cost perspective. And it would just, continue to add those constraints and costs. Restroom space becomes more of a challenge because they built enough toilets for the size school it was when it was originally built. And so even just getting groups of second and third graders to use the bathroom can be much more time consuming because they have to potentially wait in line. And that's all time that is taken away from the classroom.
What does this project mean personally to you? Why did you aren't going to have kids go through this school?
Sure. Great question. So when my wife and I moved to town 13 years ago at this point and decided this was where we were going to raise our kids, we decided if we were going to be in this town, we were going to be all in. And we have just been involved with the betterment of the town on many different levels, volunteer wise. And we continue to do that because we are grateful for what this town has given us, what the education system has given us. And I really would just like to continue to be a part of ensuring that other students in Hopkinton get the really rich educational experience that my kids got, and that this town continues to flourish because we love this town. We want to be here a long time, and we want to see it continue to grow and be better. And so when this opportunity came up, having worked on the Marathon School as the school committee representative, I had some knowledge of how this process worked. And there are plenty of volunteer opportunities for which I am not qualified. This seemed like one where I could actually add some value based on my knowledge. So I wanted to get into it and help find the solution and help people understand why this is the best solution.
Well, Jon, I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your knowledge, the work that your committee has done. I know that your heart is really in the right place, and that goes for your other committee members as well. I mean, you are all investing significant amount of time to, in the future of the kids of Hopkinton, none of which will be your own. And that's something to be applauded. So I really want to thank you for taking the time today to share that with our readers.
Peter, thank you. I really appreciate all you've done to kind of get the word out about, because there's a lot of information, there's a lot of factors driving it, and it's really important that people are well informed. So I appreciate the time and all that you're doing.